The snow came late that year. A thin frost, rare for the South, kissed the cotton fields of Willow Creek like a veil of silence. The night was still. Not a dog barked, not a door creaked. And inside the plantation house, the final notes of "Oh, Holy Night" still lingered in the parlor air. Candles flickered in the windows like little stars behind glass. The white folks had gone to bed, full of duck and rum cake, wrapped in velvet robes and false peace. Even the overseers had fallen quiet, their laughter replaced by snores and bourbon breath. But outside, something stirred. A crack. Quick, hollow, like wood against bone. Then, a scream. Short, ragged, cut off. You can almost hear the breath leave the man's body. The sharp inhale, the gurgle, the silence. The second scream came fast. Higher, more desperate. It didn't last long, and then came the dragging. Boots scraped across frozen dirt, leaving twin tracks that disappeared behind the stables. One overseer tried to run, made it 5 steps before something heavy struck his spine. He buckled. The sound his head made against the ground. Wet. Final. Another tried to crawl. He reached for the barn beam, fingertips trembling, mumbled something. A name, maybe. Or a prayer. The club found the back of his skull. Once. Twice. The third swing cracked it open. By the time the frost thickened and the wind picked up, 3 bodies lay in a circle, not placed, thrown, limbs twisted, faces unrecognizable. One man's eyes were still open, pointed toward the sky as if trying to catch one last glimpse of heaven before hell dragged him under. The clubs, simple wood, no metal, lay nearby, like firewood slick with blood. And just beyond the scene, barely visible near the corn crib, footprints, bare, small, bloody. They led into the cane rows, vanishing where the stalks bent under weight. Now imagine waking up to that. Imagine stepping onto your porch, coffee still warm in your hand, only to see the bodies of the men who once held the whip, now broken in the snow. Who did this? Why Christmas night? Why here at Willow Creek? A place known for silence, obedience, control. You can almost feel the cold creeping into your bones as you stare at the blood-soaked frost. You can almost hear the plantation waking up. A creak of wood, a sharp gasp, a rush of feet toward the barn. But it's too late. The deed is done. The message is written in blood, and the ones who delivered it, they are already gone. Or worse, they're still watching. What twisted the holiest night of the year into a night of reckoning? And who was brave, or broken, enough to spark a massacre under the moonlight? Willow Creek looked beautiful on the outside. A grand Georgian estate with pillars as white as the cotton that grew behind it. The kind of house where silver was polished daily and dinner required lace gloves. Chandeliers glittered even at noon, and the floors were waxed until they could reflect your shame back at you. But that beauty was a lie, a mask painted over rot. Inside the main house, the Christmas fire still crackled. Roasted duck bones lay scattered on porcelain plates, and a music box twirled out its last sleepy notes. Upstairs, the overseer's children were curled under wool blankets, while their fathers snored in rocking chairs, drunk from cider and pride. Outside, just 50 feet away, a different world existed. The slave quarters didn't have chimneys. No wreaths, no songs, just damp wood and the smell of mold and ash. Children slept 3 to a pallet, shivering beneath scratchy quilts made from burlap sacks. The air was so cold, it cracked lips and stung lungs. And yet, no one from the big house ever noticed. They didn't hear the coughs in the night. They didn't see the frostbitten toes. They didn't care. The enslaved worked from sunup to sundown, even on holidays. Christmas was no reprieve. Just another excuse for the masters to feel generous while feeding scraps to those who picked their cotton and scrubbed their floors. Imagine watching this unfold with your own eyes. Imagine being a child, barefoot, hungry, and forced to sing carols while your sister is beaten behind the stables for not smiling wide enough. Imagine carrying firewood to a house filled with warmth, and knowing you'll never feel that heat. The overseers at Willow Creek were cruel in the way men get when they think nothing can touch them. They didn't whip in rage. They did it, like a chore, a routine, as if the cries were background music. They had their favorites. Boys they broke early, girls they touched when no one was watching. If you were lucky, you got to die young. If not, you became something else. Silent, hollow, waiting. But something had changed in the weeks leading up to Christmas. Something small, a glance exchanged, a whispered word in the cane fields, a rusted nail hidden under a floorboard. None of the overseers noticed. Not when the tools began to go missing. Not when the hounds grew restless at night. Not even when the bell for dinner rang, and fewer feet arrived to answer, because cruelty makes you blind, and power makes you stupid. So on the night of December 24th, when they toasted to another year of obedience, they didn't see the storm brewing behind the eyes of the ones serving their drinks. They thought they had broken everyone, but they hadn't broken him, and they hadn't broken her. Two ghosts walked the grounds of Willow Creek, and come nightfall, they would no longer stay silent. Who were these shadows in the snow? And how long had they been planning this night of red reckoning? Before the blood, before the frost, before the broken skulls and scattered clubs, there was a promise, a quiet one, spoken not in a church but beneath the weeping arms of the willow tree that gave the plantation its name, a place where no white man ever wandered, a place where secrets could breathe. He was called Elijah, not by his master, of course, and they called him Boy, or that one with the scar. But the others knew his name, and they knew his silence held weight. She was Ruth, not the one from the Bible, though she clung to the Psalms like they were lifelines. She had been bought at 15, broken by 17, and numb by 20. They weren't lovers, not exactly. There was no space for that. No time. Just shared glances, shared bruises, shared dreams of something beyond the cane rows and whip cracks, and one cold evening, Ruth had whispered beneath that willow, "Next frost, we go." Elijah nodded. It was enough. But frost came early that year, and so did the betrayal. A younger slave boy, barely old enough to tie his own shoes, had been caught sneaking food. The overseer demanded names, threatened with fire, and in the desperation of hunger and fear the boy had spoken, he told them about the plan, he told them about Elijah, and he told them about the willow tree. They never found Ruth that day, but Elijah, he was dragged from the tool shed, wrists bound, shirt torn. The overseers made a spectacle of it. They didn't kill him. No, that would have been mercy. Instead, they beat him in front of the others, laughed as his teeth cracked against the dirt, mocked him when he tried to rise only to collapse again, bloodied and broken. Then they left him in the cold, half dead, fully aware. The message was clear. There is no escape, no love, no future. Not for you. But here's what they didn't know. Something inside Elijah died that day. But something else was born. Not rage. Not yet. Resolve. He didn't scream when his ribs snapped. He didn't beg when they crushed his hand. He stared. He remembered. And when Ruth returned, not dead, just hidden, she knelt beside him in silence. Didn't speak. Just held his fingers in her palms like pieces of something shattered. And together they waited, because now they weren't running, they were hunting. And Christmas night, that was the date the overseers had chosen for their feast. They had no idea that their own names had already been carved, not into wood or stone, but into the heart of a man with nothing left to lose. And beneath that same willow, where a vow was once whispered, a new one was made, not of love, of vengeance. How do you kill men who believe they're untouchable? And what does it cost to become the monster they once feared? Willow Creek Plantation moved like a machine, well-oiled, well-fed, and humming with invisible violence. But in the final days leading up to Christmas 1857, something changed. The dogs barked less. The air turned thick with silence, not peace. The kind of silence that settles before lightning strikes. Elijah didn't speak, not to the others, not even to Ruth. He limped slowly during the day, his broken ribs still tender beneath a patched shirt. But at night, he moved with purpose. He mapped every overseer's path. How many minutes they spent at the shed, which one carried the flask, which one was always too drunk to notice a shadow slipping past the barn. Ruth watched too. She cleaned the quarters in silence, her eyes counting everything. Knives missing from the cookhouse, nails rusting behind the stables, lantern oil running low. Something was coming, and the ones who'd been watching from the margins, the quiet ones, the cautious ones, started to fall in step behind them. No meetings, no speeches, just nods, just glances, because in a place like Willow Creek, words could be a death sentence. But fear? Fear was fading. Because what was left to fear when your child had been sold, when your back looked like woven leather, when you woke each day unsure if your name would still be yours by sundown? You can almost hear it building. That breath before the scream, that moment before the match strikes. And on Christmas Eve, while the house filled with laughter and clinking glasses, while turkeys roasted and bourbon flowed. Down in the slave quarters, the tools were being sharpened. Axes meant for wood, clubs meant for pigs, hooks meant for hay. Each one touched, tested, wrapped in cloth and hidden behind corn sacks or beneath straw mattresses. The men who would die. The next night slept soundly that evening. One even sang. Another urinated off the back porch and laughed when a coal slipped from his cigar and hissed in the snow. Not one of them saw the eyes watching from the trees. Not one of them felt the ground shift beneath their boots. Imagine being there. Imagine walking through that darkness, holding nothing but silence in your chest and a rusted axe in your hand. Imagine knowing that if you failed, your body would hang from a tree by morning. But if you succeeded, you might just rewrite the story of this land forever. The sky that night was clear, no clouds, no thunder. But the storm? It was already here. When the first blow lands, will it bring justice or damnation for them all? The fire was still warm in the big house hearth when the first club was raised. It was December 25th, 1857, just past 2 a.m. The overseers had eaten their fill, drank too deep. Their laughter had turned to snores. A few still staggered around. The yard, bottles swinging in lazy arcs, voices slurred with song. One tried to light a cigar, dropped the match, laughed at his own failure. He was the first to die. The club cracked across his temple with a sound like a branch snapping. He didn't scream, just folded, knees buckling beneath him, blood running down his cheek before his body hit the dirt. The second man turned, and Elijah was already there. The second blow came from behind, blunt end of a hatchet smashing the base of the skull. His body twitched twice, then went still. Another tried to run, boots slipping on frost, hands fumbling at his belt, but Ruth caught him. The club in her hands wasn't heavy, just a hickory stick, splintered and wrapped, in cloth. But when it hit bone, it didn't need to be. He collapsed before he could shout, only two left. And they were coming out of the stables now, drawn by the noise. One held a whip, the other, a pistol. Too late. Elijah charged before either could raise. A weapon. The man with the whip flinched, struck once, leather slicing through air, but Elijah didn't stop. The hatchet didn't rise this time. It went low, into the knee, then the throat. The last man fired. The shot rang out, a spark, a scream, a burst of smoke, and Elijah stumbled, but only for a second. The overseer turned to run. Ruth was already. Behind him, she didn't shout, didn't cry. She raised the club. Once, twice, 3 times, until the pistol fell from his hand, until the blood soaked her arms, until there was only silence. And in that silence you could hear everything. The wind in the cane rose, the crackle of a dying fire, and the heavy, heaving breaths of those who had survived. Imagine watching it. The snow now streaked with red, the clubs discarded like broken twigs, the faces of the dead twisted in the same smug smirks they'd worn in life, but not anymore. Now they were just men, broken, still, and the ones who stood above them, the ones who had been beaten, branded, sold, raped, and forgotten, they were not broken. They were not still. They were something else. The frost beneath Elijah's feet had melted into mud, black with blood and ash. He didn't speak, just looked at Ruth, and she nodded. They didn't run. Not yet. Instead, they dragged the bodies to the edge of the field, laid them in a line, as if offering them back to the land they'd stolen. One of the younger boys, and barely 12, lit the fire. Not a blaze. Just enough to let the smoke rise. Enough to let the other slaves see. To let them know. The spell had been broken. The masters were not gods. The overseers were not untouchable. And on this Christmas night, beneath stars that didn't care who was white or black, the world had shifted. No sermons were spoken, no hymns sung, only the crackle of fire and the rustle of sugarcane in the wind. But with dawn only hours away, what fate awaited those who dared strike back? And could the rebellion survive the price that always followed? The bodies were gone by morning, not buried, not burned, taken, dragged away by men in black coats, faces hard as stone, eyes colder than the frost, still clinging to the cotton. Willow Creek Plantation, once the pride of Beaufort County, now sat under a heavy silence. No songs, no sermons, no orders barked from horseback. Just the buzz of flies where blood had frozen into the dirt. Inside the big house, Mistress Harriet wept behind a shuttered window. Her sons were dead, her overseers slaughtered, her world shattered, and yet, the slaves still worked the fields, not out of fear, but because they knew the fire wasn't over, just paused. Elijah hadn't fled, neither had Ruth. They stayed, walked among the ashes like ghosts who had chosen not to vanish. Imagine standing there, seeing them return to the cabins, blood crusted into their clothes, eyes unreadable, not running, not hiding, just waiting. For what? Retribution? Forgiveness? No, one knew. By the second day, rumors were everywhere that the dead had been killed by outsiders, that it was a sickness, that it was the devil's work. But the slaves knew the truth. They had seen the clubs, heard the screams, tasted the silence afterward, and in that silence, something had shifted. A seed planted, not of hope, not yet, but defiance. They say the preacher at Willow Creek never returned, that the bells in the chapel rusted in place, frozen forever at midnight, that the name Elijah was whispered at neighboring plantations like a curse or a prayer. And Ruth? No one ever saw her again. Some said she walked into the cane fields and never came out. Others claimed she boarded a ship to the north, dressed as a boy, with the blood of 3 men still on her boots. And maybe that's the truth. Or maybe not. Because what matters isn't where she went, it's what she left behind. A legacy not of vengeance but of memory. Of a night when the powerless took back power, even if only for a breath. A night when Christmas meant fire instead of peace. A night when the snow turned red. And for generations after, the children of Willow Creek would be told, not fairy tales or psalms, but the story of the fire. The clubs, the blood, the silence, the footprints that vanished into the fields and never returned, and they would ask, did they get away? And the answer would always be the same. They got free, if only for one night, and they got free. Stories like this must never be forgotten. Behind every plantation facade, there are echoes of resistance, of pain, of truth buried in the soil. If you want to uncover more untold stories from the shadows of American history, stay with us, because what comes next may haunt you even more.